On behalf of Northern Illinois University's STEM Read and the NIU libraries, welcome to Future Telling. I'm Gillian King-Cargile, Director of NIU STEM Read, and I'm so excited to bring you tonight's conversation that I forgot to turn on my microphone. But now that you can hear me, we're going to be talking about fear of first contact, how science and fiction inform our search for alien life, with our guests, authors Daniel Kraus and Patrick S. Tomlinson, cosmologist Clarence Chang, and sci-fi expert Sata Prescott. We would like to thank the Friends of the Library and NIU STEAM for their support. We'd also like to thank the Division of Outreach, Engagement, and Regional Development and the Division of Research and Innovation Partnerships for their commitment to community programming. Now more than ever, we need to imagine and create a better future for ourselves and others. Who better to help with that effort than writers and scientists? If you're interested in supporting Future Telling, go to go.niu.edu/givefuturetelling and make a donation. Tonight's conversation is about the creation and destiny of the universe and the organisms that are forming along the way. We'll also explore the history and context of science fiction and cosmic horror tropes. I think we can cover that in 2 hours, right? Our first guest is Sata Prescott, who will join me in a pre-recorded presentation. After that, I'll invite our speakers for a live conversation and a Q&A session. The event will be recorded and posted on the Future Telling website. Here's my interview with Sata Prescott. Welcome to Future Telling. I'm Gillian King-Cargile, the host of Future Telling and the director of STEM Read here at NIU. And our topic today is fear of first contact. And we have a really great collection of classic sci-fi and lots of other interesting things related to this topic in our NIU libraries. So we're here with Sata Prescott today. And if you could introduce yourself and tell us what you do at NIU.
Sure thing. So I'm Sata Prescott. I work with the Rare Books and Special Collections and our digitization lab at NIU in Founders Memorial Library. My current project has to do with 19th century popular literature, usually called dime novels, which in this particular case do factor into early sci-fi. But I also get to play with the larger stacks, including our extensive pulp novels and our manuscript collections of particular authors, and notably our repository for the science fiction and fantasy writers of America.
Awesome. So, what have you brought to show us today?
I would like to bring you to the digital worlds of library collections. So welcome to the Northern Illinois University Libraries, Rare Books and Special Collections Finding Aids. So the finding aids are just that. They help you find things in the large collections. Most of the materials are under this item right here where it says Argonne. So what I've brought up is a search for all of our science fiction and fantasy writer collections. Some of my favorites happen to be Emma Bull, who writes mostly urban fantasy that deals with decay beside a fantasy world. There's Jodi Lynn Nye, who wrote some very notable science fiction in the 70s and 80s. The Philip Jose Farmer would be of particular interest, I believe, to this crowd, and so on and so forth. You can see it's a pretty substantial list. The J. Lake papers are particularly extensive. So these are almost entirely science fiction writers who are also members of the organization, the Science Fiction Writers of America, later called the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. We happen to be the official repository. When you click on Eleanor Arneson, for instance, you can find out what of her novels, short stories, and miscellaneous materials we might have. And you will have this kind of item, a typescript draft with all of these individual pages listed. So if you want to see what got changed before publication, this is the kind of thing that you can find. I highly recommend things that mention with hand notes. One of the best parts of looking at older typescripts and similar drafts is you can also see things like where an author has been censored by an editor. So what was considered in 1962 to be too horrific for the general public to possibly read in the mass media. What I would recommend is, of those names on this extensive list of authors whose manuscripts we have, you have the chance to see what was cooking before publication, essentially. And I work right now with dime novels, and one of our largest projects is called Nickels and Dimes. It's a whole library of 19th century and early 20th century cheap popular fiction. These are usually called dime novels. And these are usually thought of as westerns, detective novels, and so on. But one of the larger genres that they actually did cover was early science fiction. What I've brought up here are some of the titles that feature the tag steampunk, which is somewhat of a misnomer in this case, as these were during the time of steam, and steampunk is usually retrofuturism. So this is in fact just straight up futurism from the 19th century. And this gives you senses of the character of early thoughts about what can be reached through technological means. A lot of these stories have to do with finding hidden racist portrayals of tribes and, frankly, subjugating them horrifically. So here we have this early idea of what it is to find other people. Not a lot of them are aliens, but we treat the foreigner as alien in a lot of these. And most of them are through the access provided by these fantastic machines. The Huge Hunter is about a robot man, one of the earliest portrayals of robots, before the word robot is even in common lexicon. One of my favorites is the steam-powered robot horse that takes us through a number of racially stereotyped areas and does lots of murder. These aren't pleasant stories necessarily, but they are worth noting for where they come from and what led us to our modern sense of science fiction.
I like that electric sea spider. That sounds like a good one.
Oh yes, the electric sea spider goes and meets people at the bottom of the ocean. Oh
And then subjugates them?
yes, yes.
Come on, dime novels.
I mean, America's a racist place, and the novels of the time show this. We also have this enormous collection of early pulp magazines from the Planet Stories, Amazing Stories. These are some of the earliest places that science fiction writers get their starts in writing short stories. They have some of the most excellent interior illustrations of the time. Highly, highly recommend getting a chance to look through these. They're called pulp magazines because they're printed on very cheap pulp paper. Even though this has been a well-treated, treasured object, protected in a case for ages, it's still in very delicate condition. These are also the antecedents of what got called pulp novels, which is really where we start finding our modern sense of science fiction and cosmic horror and the fear of the unknown and the fear of what might be out there.
I love the pulp covers. I think that's really such an awesome thing. And you see that artwork kind of, perpetuating and even coming
Mhm.
back. If you look at one of our speakers tonight is Daniel Kraus, and his book Blood Sugar has that kind of throwback retro cover that you see that harkens back to those pulps.
A sensational and attractive illustration is the key in almost all of popular print publishing history. The dime novels one of the publishers of the dime novels once said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the only production cost we even worry about is the illustration. So the authors weren't particularly as valued, the stories weren't necessarily as valued, but the illustrations, that was the most important part. And you can definitely see that through the luxurious and ornate covers. And that's true of dime novels, that's true of the pulp magazines, and the eventual sort of miscategorized pulp novels that came later as well, that are definitely the direct lead into our modern science fiction novels and genre.
Well, let's talk about some common tropes that you've seen either in the dime novels or running through some of those more contemporary authors that you've shared with us today.
So, one of the things that you might notice as you're reading older stories and moving to later stories is that there's a significant bridge at World War One. Prior to World War One, and it may be unfair to say that this is the cultural tipping point cause, but in the era prior to World War One, so 1910 and earlier, um, meeting new folks and taking them over through imperialism and subjugation was adventure and fun and good by the standards of the stories. So all of the people that are met by dime novel heroes and who are strange and new are benefited by the meeting, benefited in the storyline. Everyone ends up the better for the interaction. Um, After World War One, once you start getting into the early pulp novel era or the early pulp magazine era, meetings become more fraught, more tenuous, and more personal. Um, in these sorts of stories where we're meeting new people, we're meeting one individual from a strange place rather than the whole tribe of strange people. And that one individual is far more dangerous than the tribe of cannibals from the earlier era. I even hate saying it, but so that is one of the most interesting shifts that you'll see in these early stories.
So I think that's really interesting that you have that shift. You know, you have kind of the conquering hero, and everyone's really glad to see him.
Mhm.
Um, and then you move into this era where we're not quite sure how this interaction is going to go. The heroes of the story are no longer in control of the situation. It sounds like
Exactly. In
they're
the
no
earlier
longer
stories,
superior.
yes, our early heroes can do everything perfectly, are capable, are strong, are heroes in the classical sense. Um, and to an extent, our mid 20th century protagonists are still competent and capable, but that itself isn't enough to easily succeed the day. You start getting counter, well, antagonists, I suppose, uh, who, while are just one individual or a smaller group, are as competent but to different purpose than our protagonist. So you'll get a lot of heroes who are rugged, competent men who know how to handle a gun and have some kind of professional background. And your antagonists will be clever, intelligent mad scientists or um, um, foreign individuals or people from another plane who are almost the same as us, but intrinsically different than our protagonist, who are just as capable. So the outcome, even when in a series or set of stories where you expect the protagonist to still win by the end, the tension is tight all the way until the end, typically.
But they do come out on top because they're because they're so capable.
Typically, up until about the 50s, and then you start getting a mix of different types of endings. In the later Bradbury era, you'll start seeing a lot more alternate options or more explicit horror by the end. For a long time, editors wouldn't allow the hero to not win. Several publishing companies would have a style book of types of requirements that had to be fulfilled. So going back to manuscripts, those are the sorts of things that get censored. We have a copy of the dime novel requirements put forth by the publisher Beadle and Adams. And what gets listed in there is that no matter what gore and awfulness happens in the interim, we must be able to justify that the story is morally correct. So the people that we agree with are the good people, the people we don't agree with are the bad people, and the people we agree with have to win. And Beadle and Adams was trying to demonstrate that they were above the other pop culture publishers who were just publishing trashy sensationalism. Mind you, Beadle and Adams were still publishing trashy sensationalism. But their brand was that they were morally superior. And they held that by claiming that their writers could only write, successful heroes triumphing over the bad strangers.
But what about that idea of, that the other is so completely unknown and unknowable? When does that come in? So like that, the Lovecraft idea that, these creatures are, vast and ancient and completely beyond our understanding, and we are completely insignificant to them.
So that was very much a product of the 1920s and 1930s and on. That is a trope that stayed put in the slightly more literary material for a long time. That didn't start filtering into cheap pop culture, which is primarily what we've been talking about, until after the 60s and 70s. I personally think it has to do with bridges between literary speculative fiction and more popular speculative fiction via things like The Twilight Zone and other major bridge points like that. But the idea of unconquerable and unknowable is a trope that is resisted by a lot of more popular materials. And that itself, I think, is fascinating. That resistance to publish heroic failure is present.
Thank you to Sata Prescott and his cat for that presentation. And now we're going to invite in Patrick S. Tomlinson, Daniel Kraus, and Clarence Chang. All right, I think we're all here. So thank you so much for joining me
I'm the only
tonight.
giant floating head, so I'm going to push this back just a little bit.
If you could just maybe closer, just your eyeball. That's what we want. Like it's its own planet, because we are talking about space. So if my guests could, if you could introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your research and or writing and the things that maybe you think I brought you here today for. Let's start with Clarence.
Hi, thanks, Gillian. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Clarence Chang. I'm a scientist at Argonne National Lab. I'm also part of on the faculty with the University of Chicago's Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics. So I'm the scientist on this meeting, I guess. And I'm a little bit different, I think, from what the spirit may be all about. So I study something known as cosmology. which in a nutshell is trying to understand how the universe, the entire universe began, how it changes over the time, and maybe how gain some insight into how it will change going into the future. And so kind of from that perspective, things like stars, which makes up part of galaxies, and the planets around them and the life associated with that, isn't really something that the universe seems to care about. Now, how I go about this is I go about building cameras to look at the beginning of time, essentially. So we look out at the most distant things that we can see, and it turns out if you look out as far as you can, you see the universe when it was a baby, when it was an infant. You see it when basically it was 400,000 years old out of the 14 billion years that it is now. And to do that, you need some special cameras, and you need to put them in some special places. The ideal place is a satellite in space. Where I go is a close approximation, which is we go to the South Pole. And there we've built a few telescopes. We put our special cameras there, and we stare out into the early universe to look at it and to take baby pictures and to understand in detail what's going on at that point.
All right, excellent. And let's see, how about Daniel Kraus?
Hey, hi. I'm Daniel Kraus. I'm a novelist, primarily. I've written about 10 novels, and they, well, technically, I guess 11 as of a few weeks ago, but they cover a large range of topics and age ranges, really. I've written as young as middle grade up through, adult. I haven't done a picture book yet. And I generally work in areas that are horror or horror adjacent. And a few times that has butted up against speculative stuff, science fiction. And it's while my primary interest genre-wise is probably more horror, I definitely have dug into the sort of philosophical ideas of space and how humans, regular humans, not scientist humans, not that you aren't regular, are scientists out there, but how they conceive of themselves in the universe and how they just deal with the incomprehensible vastness of it.
Excellent. All right, and Patrick Tomlinson.
Hello. I am Patrick Tomlinson. I am just blow my head way up again. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Anyway, I'm Patrick Tomlinson. I'm a novelist and op-ed writer. I've got a half a dozen books out now about with science fiction themes. Several times now. This is wrong way. There he is. The laziest cat in the world back here. Is Robert Mueller sleeping on top of our little tank here for our buddy Nibbler. Anyway, so they're going to be judging me the entire time. I am really looking forward to this. I think this is going to be a fun panel.
Well,
the three of us could not be more different.
Yeah, I like that your cat waved. I'm glad that your cat is media trained.
Oh, no, he's just really lazy. So.
Well, I think that you're an interesting combination of speakers because you all kind of, from what I know of your work, represent different angles on this idea of, big questions of the universe and of what is alien. So when I think of Daniel's work, when I think of something like Bent Heavens, one of your newest books, I think of the idea of alien as other, and alien as metaphor for what we do to each other as humans. And then I also think about Scowler, which is something that's much more of a cosmic horror piece that's, space is indifferent to us, but things will affect us if they land on our planet. And Patrick, I think of your books like Gatecrashers as, you know, humans could interact with aliens, but we're so far behind them that they probably don't want us mucking around in space. And then Clarence, I think you had one of my all-time favorite quotes when we talked before this meeting, where I'll paraphrase it, where you basically said, I don't care about life or planets. I'm concerned with the creation and ultimate destiny of the universe. And I thought, what could be more like badass cosmic horror than that idea, right? Like, it doesn't even matter.
Oh, he's fun at parties.
Do what it's going to do. So I think we'll start by, in a few words, I've summed it up, but what do you think your position is on the possibility of a life in the universe or life outside of Earth?
This is to everyone or just to me?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's interesting that you bring that up. So not in my field so much in cosmology, but in astronomy and astrophysics, the question of life comes up quite often. One example that I can think of in my own experience and research was there's this phenomena that was known as gamma ray bursts. There are these extremely bright explosions in the sky, and they would just flash for these instances. And in the early days, actually, one of the, there are published papers about how maybe this was Star Wars-like interstellar combat, and we're just kind of getting unlucky blasts of laser light, just happening to come towards the Earth and hit us, or there's catastrophic explosions, think Death Star-like, that you're seeing those kinds of things. This certainly is, so though I myself make this joke that we don't care, it is something that is in the mind of scientists, and something that we want to test scientifically. Right, so you had to calculate. Somebody had to calculate there. Well, if the Death Star shot a laser beam, how much energy would there be? And if it was that far away, would I have actually seen it? So this person claims it's a Death Star, and some poor student somewhere has to now calculate this, which probably was actually a pretty good calculation to do. So there's that elements. These days, actually, there's a lot of focus on understanding because we can now see planets. And using that as a way of understanding perhaps how life develops, and trying to look very much for evidence for life on planets that are not our own. So though I joke that cosmology and astrophysics doesn't care about that, it does still permeate. It is still very much within the avenue of things that we are interested in studying. For me in particular, in cosmology, we just deal with things that are of a different size. Yeah, so we use the word universe, and we use the word billions of years, and so we're just concerned with a different set of questions.
Okay. So Daniel, things coming from space don't care about us? Or where would you say you?
Well, I mean, I don't know anything about science. I would say that my gut tells me that if things are coming from space, no, they couldn't care less about us. I don't really. I mean, my personal beliefs, if that's part of the question. I mean, I believe in almost nothing, but I do believe. I think you have to believe in some sort of life out there. I mean, it seems foolish not to believe that. Do I believe we'll connect with any intelligent life before our planet is self-destructs? No, I don't. But I would love that to happen. But I'd like it to happen right before I die naturally, anyway. Because if it goes really, really wrong, I don't want to live under like alien rule or whatever.
Okay, so Patrick, what do you think about that? I think that's a good segue into some of the things that your work explores.
Well, and I actually want to comment on both Clarence and Daniel's a little bit statements there because Clarence brought up gamma ray bursts, but he kind of smoothed over a little bit how just what exactly they are and what they mean. He just threw that out there like, oh, everybody knows what a gamma ray burst is. That's just old hat. So what a gamma ray burst is when you have a star that is, and he can probably correct me if I screw up uh, the scale here, but if you have a star that is several tens of times larger than our sun, that goes into supernova and collapses in on itself and creates a black hole while doing that, the the magnetic fields and the eddy currents of that event forces all of the high energy rays, which I mean usually it'd be like X-rays, it'd be visible light. Well, because of the energy of this event, it pushes it all the way up into the gamma rays, which is how you create the Incredible Hulk. Everyone knows that. But it funnels those rays into just two jets, one that comes out of the north pole of the collapsing star and the one that comes out of the south pole of the collapsing star, which is what really screwed us up in the beginning because we saw these things and we thought, oh, this is a spherical event. Like this much energy is being released in every direction, like an explosion that we would normally understand. And that wasn't what was happening. And so it screwed us up. But the very first time we saw gamma ray bursts was with, and I may be stepping outside of my zone just a little bit here, but it was with U.S. spy satellites that we put in orbit in order to watch for banned nuclear testing from the Russians during the Cold War. When all of a sudden these spy satellites noticed these same gamma ray bursts that are usually associated with terrestrial nuclear bomb explosions coming from space. And that freaked us out a lot because all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, the Russians aren't just detonating these test ban treaty violating nukes on the surface, but they've somehow managed to put them in orbit until someone ran the numbers and triangulated it and was like, the Russians would have had to have detonated a bomb bigger than the sun on the other side of the known universe, which is when we realized there was something going on that we didn't understand in any way, not in any way. So that kind of speaks to what Clarence was talking about with cosmology as things jump up on us that we're not expecting when we're out poking around in the black. And then to Daniel's points, where he was, he doesn't believe we're going to come across, alien life during any of our lifetimes or the lifetimes of any of the attendees. I might not be quite that pessimistic, but I do think that the most likely first contact scenario for humanity will be with a tomb. I think that once we start pushing out, I think that it is more likely that we're going to come across a planet, whether we're using generation ships or some Alcubierre drive, that we put together in the next millennia or whatever. I think that it's more likely that we will come across a dead civilization, and that will be our first contact. We will come across people who got further than us and still fell short. So that's my answer.
Okay. Well, I saw Clarence nodding through your response, so I think you did a good job with the science there. Anything to add to that, Clarence?
No, I think you got it. I'm impressed because I can't speak that meaningfully about literature.
Well, when we talked before, Clarence, you were telling me that you did read sci-fi as a kid. Was there anything that stood out to you when you were reading sci-fi? Anything that that might have influenced you in your career, or that didn't at all, and you were like, oh, I don't want to do science like that?
I think perhaps science is very disappointing compared to what science fiction presents it as. In that there's a lot of mundane aspects of just um, how things operate. Lots of Zoom meetings, lots of telecons. These stellar conclusions are the results of a lot of work that seems a lot less exciting. But I think the questions are a bit different. Yeah, certainly for me, trying to understand how the world, how the universe works, and kind of, in my line of work, pulling the people, the humanity, for lack of it, out of it. But I think, in science fiction and storytelling, kind of humanity is part of it. Or certainly that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think absolutely. So what about Patrick and Daniel? So I know that you both do a lot of research for your books. So specific to space or alien life, is there something that you found in the course of your research that's really astounded you or sent you down like a big research rabbit hole that really you just wanted to dig into?
I'll take this because I don't have a very long list. Yeah, I do it. I do a lot of research, but as needed, and it's so broad, the amount of research, that I generally forget. I might spend 4 months studying up on something, but 2 years later, it's all gone because I've moved on to 50 other things to study, and my brain doesn't retain it. But definitely in my book, Zebulon Finch, which I have here, all 800 and some pages of it. There's a section. There's a section that takes place during the space race, and the attempts, the sort of battle between the U.S. and Russia to get a man in some sort of pod into space. And that was, when I write fiction, I try to be almost a little overwhelming with my detail sometimes, because I want to convey the impression that you're in good hands and that somebody has done the work, even if I'm going to forget it a couple years later or a couple months later. And I definitely really got in. I mean, there's so much when you're talking about like that particular space race or any. There's so much to learn about, whether it's the astronauts or the technology. And I came across various manuals. I should have brought them up because they're thicker than my novel, but various manuals on the spacecraft itself, the capsule. And I think this manual was, on board the capsule, or maybe I might be wrong about that, but it's just like every nut and bolt and screw and fuse inside the capsule and how it's built and how it's operated. And I loved just digging into that because it's so mind-bendingly complicated that if I could just understand a smidgen of it, then for that page, I would be like the smartest guy in the room, just ever so briefly. But I could capture that moment in time in fiction and pass it on. I mean, generally my aim is not any of that. I'm not really trying to teach anything. I'm trying to set the plate for much more human discussions.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that part of Zebulon Finch is also what the different characters think they're going to get out of sending someone to space, what they think they're going to discover from the act of actually, penetrating the sky. Do you have anything you want to add about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, if you have that group of astronauts, Neil Armstrong and company, not John Glenn and company, you're going to have that many different opinions on what everyone wants to get out of it. The science wants something out of it. The the astronauts want something out of it. The sort of PR people want something else out of it, and the American people and in the world, they want something else out of it too. That's much more maybe emotional. And Zebulon Finch, who is unlike any other human, of course, he just wants to. He's on sort of a one-man war against God at that point, which sounds fantastical. But you're gonna have to go with me on this. At this point, we're 1,300 pages into the story, so he's gotten to this point where he's determined that he's done living because he's sort of immortal and wants to leave the world behind and go into the darkness of space and redirect the capsule so that it just heads out into the darkness, and hopefully he'll encounter some sort of God being at some point, and they can face off in some way.
Yeah, definitely. By the time you get to that point in the duology, you're going wherever he's going. You're like, he's going to space.
Yeah.
Yep, let's do it. He's going to be a cult leader.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do it. Let's go there. Very fun. So Patrick, let's go back to the research question because you were getting the thumbs up from Clarence, and you were telling me that you've been doing a lot of research on the history of the entire universe. So what's your research process like, and what have you found that's really blown your mind?
Well, the first thing I found early in my career is that I researched the fact that you can write 2 400-page books instead of 1 800-page book and get paid advances twice. That's an amazing thing. Just ribbing you just a little bit. But what I love about the research process is that I have the first book that I wrote was called The Ark. It was set on a 10-mile-long generation ship. It was basically a murder and the Orient Express in space. But I still needed to make a 10-mile-long generation ship that was going to be out in space for 200 years, supporting 50,000 people, generation after generation. I needed that to actually work. And I kind of fell down a rabbit hole on that one. For several months, I was trying to figure out what exactly is every person's oxygen allotment during a day. What is their caloric intake? How many acres or hectares of crop is necessary to grow that much caloric intake? How much water does somebody go through every day? What do you need? What kind of equipment do you need to process that much water? And like the ship, I thought it was going to start out being, a mile-long ship. A mile-long ship sounds huge, right? It's not for that task. And so by the time I was done, and by the time I had enough square acreage to grow the crops that were necessary, and I had enough plumbing necessary and to process the water, and I had enough air in reserve because every spaceship leaks air. Like the International Space Station right now is leaking air. We don't have perfect seals. We never do. Almost every supply mission that we send up there brings more air. Not because the astronauts have breathed it and can't recycle it. It's because it leaks into space, and we need more. So to put this thing in space for 2 centuries, and how much additional, how much additional air just to keep them breathing. Yeah, so that ended up being about a month-long process, and that was just the first book I wrote. More recently, I'm working on this book that explores. I mean, you were just talking about immortality, Daniel, and how somebody gets sick of it after not a terribly long time. The book I'm writing right now is exploring immortality against a cosmic timescale, more in line with what Clarence is doing. The book is called Exponential. It's told in 6 little vignettes that end up working together to form a bigger narrative, but each vignette is an exponent. It follows the same main character, but each vignette jumps exponentially further into the future. So you start at year 1, and then you're at year 100, then at year 1,000, then year 1,000,000, then a billion, then a trillion, then literally the heat death of the universe, following the same person. But of course, after those kinds of time scales, you're not dealing with the same person anymore. That's just not possible. And so the research that has gone into that has gone beyond what I was doing before with, I mean, I say near-term future, where I was just writing stuff that was only a few hundred years in the future. Now we're talking about trillions. We're talking about red dwarfs burning out, and then we're talking about white dwarfs cooling off until they're just iron balls floating in space. Those kinds of timescales were not things that I had ever messed around with before. And to try and imagine what a single human life would look like at the end of that has been a challenging research experience.
Well, we've got Clarence right here, so what does the end of the universe look like? Do you have any predictions for us, or anything we should know?
I think we don't quite know, but what we understand right now is interesting. It's something we're trying to learn more about, this phenomena of dark energy. Right. So dark energy is what we refer to as the unknown physics right now that seems to be driving the accelerated expansion of space. So this was also something that was confirmed or discovered in my lifetime as well, which is that if we were to project into the future, what happens right now is that everything stretches and expands away from us, and that expansion accelerates. So more and more in the future, the more and more further apart everything will wind up, to the extreme being that actually, you wouldn't be able to look out, you wouldn't be able to see anything. Certainly outside, I would say, of your galaxy. There might be some ideas as to what happens to the galaxy, but you would look outside the galaxy and you wouldn't see anything else. And there have been people wondering, what would we have been thinking scientifically if we lived then, right? Because you would look out and you would say, oh, I don't see anything. There's nothing there. It's just me, right? A lot of our early ideas about the universe were just centered, or the Earth was the center of everything, and our galaxy was the center of everything. And at that point in time, if you looked out, you would see nothing. You would be correct. You would be thinking that you were the center and there was nothing else. But that would be incorrect. Actually, there would be, everything was just pushed outside of your ability to observe. So that's kind of a strange place to be. Right, that we can see everything now, but as far as we understand, everything will eventually be invisible, stretched way beyond our ability to see them. And understanding why that is it's an outstanding question.
There'll be no Hubble moment when we look out and realize that, oh, that fuzzy star is actually the Andromeda Galaxy.
That's right.
Made of
all gone.
So I do think that is kind of an overlap in all of your work. So there are these unanswered questions that you're trying to solve through different mediums. So is there something about the kind of unknowability, I guess, of the universe, or of the alien or the other, that attracts you to this kind of story or this kind of research?
Anybody? My turn? Okay. I do believe what I said earlier when that I think our first interaction with an alien civilization will be a tomb, just because of the scale of the universe. I think that the likelihood that we will be able to reach out physically and find another civilization that's anywhere near our level at the same time is pretty low. But that doesn't discount that they were there already. I think that we're going to get out there. I think we're going to get out there within our own solar system and realize that life is everywhere. I think that we're going to go to Mars and realize that there's perhaps either fossilized or still existent subsurface microbial life. I think that we're going to go and do mission return samples of Enceladus and the subsurface ocean that they have there and find that something is cooking. I think we're going to do the same at Europa. I think that when we go to Titan, really start looking at the methane oceans there and start trying to figure out why the hydrogen is missing in the atmosphere at below certain altitudes, I think we're going to find things that look an awful lot like biology, just not in any chemical makeup that we understand it now. But that's obviously not the same as civilization. But with just the enormous size of the universe, I think there are probably civilizations everywhere, but they were probably sitting on these little islands where we can't get to them. We probably can't talk to them in any sort of realistic time frame unless they are really good at lasting a really long time. And if they are, then they would probably get here. We wouldn't really want to talk to them or even let them know that we're here. So I think that a lot of sci-fi, going back quite a long time now, has taken ideas of the universe as it probably exists and shrinks them down. I think that things like Star Trek and Star Wars, where there are civilizations everywhere and there's a million different sentient species, I think there probably are a million sentient species throughout the universe. I don't think you're all going to find them in a cantina together, but that's kind of the job of sci-fi is to shrink things down into a more digestible size. And I think that's a job that a lot of sci-fi authors take pretty seriously. And sometimes we go over the edge with it, like you had mentioned Gatecrashers earlier. Well, yeah, that is totally a Mos Eisley Cantina, crowded galaxy sort of book, and the follow-on too. There's all sorts of critters, all running around and making deals and stealing things. It's a great series of books. But then, like my more recent one, there's two. I got a cut here. Into Black. It's The Hunt for Red October in Space. Give it a try. Came out last Tuesday. But mankind has been out in the cosmos for 2 centuries at that point and just stumbles into somebody else, and neither of them expected to find each other. That's probably more likely than the cantina scenes.
Okay. What do you think, Daniel?
Well, I mean, I think it just makes sense that when we find some small civilization in the middle of some massive forest somewhere, or we find new creatures at the bottom of the ocean. I mean, we haven't found everything here. I mean, the idea that we would find things out there that, again, are living in the same time of us seems preposterous. So basically, yeah, in my amateur view, agree with all that. I mean, I think the idea of finding a tomb is just fascinating, and it makes a lot of sense. You're going to spend a lot more time dead than you are alive. So I think that's great, and I'm kind of disappointed. I haven't considered that myself as the basis of an idea. It's so rich in so many ways. Yeah, it makes sense.
Dibs on that.
And I'm not. Yeah, and I don't know if I have that much more to say on this. I mean, I'm dealing with space more in metaphorical ways. I'm dealing with space in the sense of its vastness in a very abstract way, in the same way that someone can feel that alone kind of on Earth. Scholar is about a family that's extremely isolated out in the countryside, and just surrounded by cornfields. And to some extent, it feels like they're on an isolated planet. I mean, once the stuff starts to happen to them, there's nobody who can help them. There's no other route. There's no other worlds out there. It's just their sort of imploding universe.
Did you like that, Clarence?
Yeah, it reminds me of the other aspect of the work I do with the South Pole. So, so we have to take our instrumentation there. We have to build our facility there. And that all takes place in the summertime here. I mean, the wintertime here, the summertime down there. And then at the end of the summer season, around February, actually right on Valentine's Day, the vast majority of people, the majority being, maybe only 200, 170 of those people leave, and 30 people remain for the winter time, where there are no more flights in there. And you get hints of various sorts about what that life might be like. And what we all know is that we don't get the complete picture. Only those 30 people actually know what that life is like. We get little tastes of it over the summer where we're only surrounded by 200 people or 100 other people. But yeah, there's a distance, a separation there. That's really interesting, I think. My understanding is that when that last plane leaves, they have a movie night where they watch it.
Just as an instructional manual, like, if this goes down.
That's right. This is
Isolate,
what you do. This is
contain, burn it to the ground.
If you
right.
suspect anyone at all, burn them. Yeah.
That was great. That was the next thing I was going to ask about. I think, I don't know how much we got into this. Sata, in the opening video, brought up some interesting ideas about how the role of aliens has changed throughout sci-fi. And also, he brought up the idea of censorship. Like, there were points, where, people weren't ready. Publishers felt that people weren't ready to experience the alien or the other in that way. How does your work, this will be for the authors, how does your work come out of that tradition? How does it change, based on where we are now in culture? And what do you see as the role going forward of kind of alien stories, first contact stories, other type of stories?
Well, from my own work, I try to actively reject it because for the longest time, I mean, sci-fi has always been trying to speak to the socio-economic, political issues of the day. And through the 20s and 30s, that was definitely and into the 40s, that was definitely the growth of fascism. 50s, 60s, and even to a lesser extent into the 70s, you were talking about fighting against communism and its spread. And so for a very long time in sci-fi, it was the aliens were a stand-in for a defined enemy. They were less about having their own agency. They were more about being an anvil to strike against. They were more about being a force of nature, and they were often not very well defined. Since then, we've kind of moved away from that because the world has become, especially since after Vietnam, the world has become much more complicated. And we've started to realize that the aliens, meaning other human beings that just were a different color and a different country or had a different language, they weren't aliens. They were just different, and they had their own ideas of how things should be done. They had their own culture. They had their own histories. And so once we broke free of that very, very didactic, very polarized view of us versus the aliens, things got, in my opinion, much more interesting in sci-fi. And so I try to do that too with all of my books. You know, I ask whether the humans showing up is a good thing. I ask whether the humans are best prepared to deal with a given crisis or given questions. I ask if their morality is the right one, or maybe not right one, that's probably the wrong word, but the most applicable in that situation. So yeah, I actively fight against the trope that's predominated sci-fi for so long, because I think it's radically outdated, and othering has been one of the most divisive problems in our society for a long time. Like, it used to be just, you know, better dead than red, but now, I mean, looking around our country today, there's still people who are you know, there's segments of our population that is pushing back against gay marriage. There's segments of our population that is, you know, it's like all for family separations. There's segments of our population that thinks getting trans troops out of the military is a great idea. And like, these are all objectively terrible ideas that had their home in that whole us versus them narrative that predominated for 70 years. So
yeah, I think that's well said. The book I'd primarily be talking about is this one here, Bent Heavens, which is essentially about a girl whose father thought he had been abducted by aliens, and then he kind of vanished. And he put all these alien traps around his country home because he was so obsessed with this idea. And then one day, you know, the father's long gone at this point, but the daughter catches an alien and has to decide what to do with it. And she and her friend, it's sort of like the anti-ET. They just, instead of deciding to cuddle it and support it, they decide to torture it to try to get information about what happened to the dad. So it's kind of all about that. It's I think in this book and kind of some of the other things that I've touched on in the other books, they're really about the alien as representing whatever a group of people decide they need to be whatever a group of people decides they need to focus against. The book I did with George Romero this year, The Living Dead, it's about zombies, obviously, because it's George Romero, but it's more horror than sci-fi, but there's a whole thread running through it where the zombies for the first 2/3 of the book don't have a name. And this kind of goes back to Night of the Living Dead, where they were called ghouls instead of zombies. But everyone in the country and in the world comes up with their own names for them, and they're whatever they feel they need to call the other. So some people call them zombies, some people call them ghouls, some people call them gangs, some people they use whatever terminology they need to excuse them going after these zombies, which in the book they're not that much of a threat. They shouldn't be that much of a threat. And the book whenever they're spoken about for most of the book, they're spoken about as them and they, and I always capitalize them and they, so to kind of drive in the point that they are they, they're whatever isn't us. So I don't remember where this question started, but I will say that it's something that when the few times I've dealt with aliens it's completely wrapped up in this idea. Bent Heavens began as really me thinking about Abu Ghraib, the prison there, and how we were torturing people allegedly to get information, and then how all the documents of that those so-called enhanced interrogations, much of it is now buried, so we'll never get to read about it. Those are the sort of topics I'm talking about through sci-fi / horror.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings up an interesting idea. So right now, I think it's safe to say that there is a current, an anti-science current in the country, and you know, safe to say. Um, so, and Clarence, I know that at Argonne and on the South Pole project that you work with international teams. So, how I guess how does the process of working with international teams work? How do you see the pipeline of STEM working either toward or against inclusiveness now?
So I think it's an interesting question, one that I didn't anticipate. I think this is something that we are starting to recognize is of value, and is important, that we can't completely disconnect ourselves from the fact that we are social, right? That we are human beings. So as much as we try to abstract our work away, we carry it out as people, and we inherit all of the challenges of being a human being. All the benefits and all the drawbacks. And we want to work to engage more and more people, to bring in more ideas. And, if indeed science is this noble endeavor, it should be something that transcends, I think, some of these things that seem to divide us. And so we're learning a lot about ourselves, I think, and learning and trying our best, I think, to be better. And in that context, it means reaching out both internationally, is what you brought up, but also I think even within our own community and our own society, we don't engage to the full spectrum with which we should. And there's a lot of work now going forward to try to change that, I think.
Good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Actually, can I ask you a question, Clarence? At this South Pole telescope project, I mean, how many?
Yeah,
how many
it's so our project is
how many countries
the
are
vast
sending
majority is
representatives
actually in the
scientists?
U.S. And it relies a lot upon the U.S. investment in the infrastructure at the South Pole. The U.S. is one of the strongest supporters of science at both the South Pole and Antarctica in general. The National Science Foundation is the primary agency doing that. There are other experiments like the Ice Cube experiment, which has a larger international dimension to it. And these sorts of things are complicated. It's part of what I was referring to, that in some of these things, a part of what it means to be a scientist does not involve doing science, but say building these bridges. So treaties have to be signed by countries to enable participation. You have to engage people of a different culture and their governments and their own national interests as we do this. This has been, I talk about Antarctica in particular, but this has been true of astronomy for all of history, because you have to find that site. There are those places on Earth that you can do this, right? And if it's not in your country, it means you have to navigate that. And so science has embraced a kind of a multinational dimension. Scientists, we have had to learn what it means to be to involve politicians in the work, and to understand the way that our work influences local concerns. All right. That's right.
And the ice,
that's right. It's the one where they drill holes in the ice and they put their little photo detectors in there. It's an amazing thing.
After the neutrinos pass completely through the entire planet and maybe hit one atom on the other side of it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
He does
So,
some he does some cool
what other
stuff down there.
questions do you
Like
have
he's
for each other? I think those are my, some of my major topics that I wanted to cover, but I also wanted to see, um, what you want to know about each other's work, or, anything else you might want to talk about.
I have I'm paralyzed with thoughts. Give me a second.
okay. Daniel, the only thing that I've read of yours, I'm ashamed to say, was The Shape of Water, which I thought was amazing. Because I saw the film, I know they were written pretty much, it wasn't like one wasn't really an adaptation of the other.
Exactly.
It was
Yeah.
kind of co-written, much like 2001: A Space Odyssey was back in the day. So I know that's no small feat, and so I didn't have so much of a question as just compliments to the chef on that, because you really did go much deeper into the
Yeah, I
development
mean, I think it's. I mean, I guess this is technically
obviously
off
a
topic,
staple
but
of the Hellboy
yeah,
series.
2001, the movie in 2001, the book by Arthur C. Clarke. That's the only example I know of something that's kind of like what we did there. So it's sort of a book and a movie happening simultaneously, and each one involves Guillermo and I both participating, but taking the leads in different way. Him in the movie and me in the book. I mean,
Yeah, and it was very cool because I
mm-hmm.
actually I took a couple of film classes, and one of the things that we did is we went back and we watched 2001 and um, Clockwork Orange and a bunch of those films,
Yeah.
and then read the book that they were based on, with the exception of 2001 where they were jointly
Yeah,
written.
yeah, it
And I
was.
hadn't really known of anybody else
Yeah, it
doing
was
that, so I thought that
a
was
unique and strange
kind of a
experience
cool
all
thing that
around.
you got to do.
Uh, I want. I mean, I feel like I don't ever get to talk to a cosmologist. Like, I want to. I want to come up with fascinating questions for you. uh, and I'm stumbling over any good one, but I guess what I'm gonna just end up saying is something stupid, which uh, is there anything out there? What would be the closest thing out there to what you would consider to be a monster? Like, is there a force out there that is a dangerous force when it comes to life? Is there something that's threatening to us or to any other life out there that feels like the universe's monster?
I don't know. That's a good question. I would say my knee-jerk reflex was to say stars. Stars are really dangerous things, and they're this thing that's so important for governing everything that we take for granted. Yet on the timescales that like astrophysicists think about, these are things that live. They are born, they grow, and then they die and they go away. And in that process, when they release all their energy, they kind of just wipe away everything else that's in their local vicinity. So there's this, a civilization so anchored to the star, and yet at some level, it's this thing that just when time's up, that's it. It wipes it all away. And I guess at some level, that would be it. Uh, but I'm not sure. We like to use the word dark, right? So there's dark matter and dark energy. I think physically we just mean that it's something that doesn't couple to the photon, but it's helpful that it lends some air of mystery and maybe evil to it. Yeah.
I I like how Daniel asked you for like some far away threat, and instead you're like, no, every solar system has this world-ending monster.
Well, if I could come back,
like
so something that
they're all
both of
monsters.
you guys seem to
You're all
latch
gonna die.
onto, which is interesting, I think, is this idea of a tomb. It suggests that actually what terminates or what you guys are thinking, the life or civilization that will kick in far before that star wipes that planet away. That perhaps we are life, or certainly our life might be actually a far more disastrous, I don't know, way of putting it, that we might be a greater enemy than these sort of catastrophic events. I thought that's interesting that you could find a tomb, right? The tomb has to persist. It's still physically there. The asteroid hasn't wiped it away. The star-going supernova hasn't gotten rid of it. You think it's far more likely for some other reason that civilization has just gone away. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, but it's just a function of time, though. I mean, we know that in about our sun has another 4.5 billion years left to it, but we know that in another 500 million years, it's going to be so hot that we're going to start turning into Venus. So we either start moving the Earth further away, uh, or we move on to Mars, and then we move on to Europa, and then we move on to Titan, or figure out a way out of the solar system. So yeah, I think that I really do think that the most likely scenario for a first contact is that we find a white dwarf star with a bunch of cinders floating around it, and hey, there's an awful lot of 90-degree angles and round structures here that just shouldn't be here otherwise. And we go take a look. Um, do I necessarily think the star will be what have killed those civilizations? No, I don't. Um, we've been here in the way that we are, like in the way that we're able to talk. I mean, I'm not sure where exactly you guys are in the country, but I'm sitting here in Milwaukee. Uh, we've been here where we can talk over distances more than shouting for less than a century. And we're already looking at several different things that could just put an end to this whole great run that we've had. I mean, we were doing pretty damn good there for quite a while, but global warming is catching up with us. We're figuring out what a global pandemic actually looks like. I am not so pessimistic that I think that we could be killed off entirely by any of those things, short of maybe an asteroid strike. I mean, some of us would survive, but then you have to start completely over. And how much knowledge is left? Are you resetting the clock to 100 years or 1,000 years?
I think that one of the things that's interesting to follow up on what Clarence said as well is that idea of stars, but it's also when you study radiation, you're also studying the thing that's killing us. In a recent talk, Andy Weir was talking about the limitations of space travel and how far we could get away from the Earth realistically. And he said that, paraphrasing, like the greatest challenge of space travel is that humans can't be in space. Like it's not our spaceships, it's our bodies themselves that just can't handle the radiation. And so that medical technology and medical advances are really going to be the things that can push us out. So I think that's, there's your monster, but it also is so much of what we're learning about.
Was he saying that doctors would change the bodies of astronauts so they'd be hardier?
I think he was coming at it from like we need to figure out how to have better like protective gear and things like that, and how to understand maybe getting into like how we can become more resistant to radiation as well. Yeah, we'd have to get him on the call.
human tardigrade hybrids. You're just gonna have to find a big enough tardigrade to mate with. From there, it gets really simple.
Okay. So it's about
Nobody's coming along with me
7:21.
for this one. All right,
Do we
that's
have
fine.
any other questions for each other?
If I could ask just one more question, and it's the simplest, most obvious question, but I am curious if there's, if you look at your work you've done, and you look back to the formative books you read and films that you saw, was there one that that put you on this path more than any other? Not necessarily your favorite book, but the one that provided this path.
I actually kind of came late. Yeah. I kind of came late into the game of trying to write. Like I've been a lifelong reader, but I only started thinking that I should write about 10 years ago. And there was one book in particular that was criminally underrated. It came out through Tor, which happens to be my publisher now, but that's not a plug. But it was by a man named James L. Cambias, and it was called A Darkling Sea. And the book was based or was set on a Europa-type roofed world. And by roofed world, I mean an ocean world that had a frozen crust on the outside, keeping the liquid oceans inside of it not only insulated but protected from radiation and all that. And so inside of this roofed Europa-type world, there was this race of hyper-intelligent lobsters that had lived their entire society for like 2 million years in complete darkness. They never developed eyes. They never developed anything based on sight. They just because they lived in darkness. And instead of having books, they had reels. So they would have it was like knots. Like if you've ever seen Quipu from down in South America, where you still don't exactly know what the Mayans coding for them was, but you'd read the knots in these lines. So they had reels instead of books, and the knots thickness and duration, spacing was how they formed characters. And it was just one of the I'm sitting here rooting for these blind shadow lobsters. Because it was such an alien race in such an alien place, and yet he still managed to write them in a way that was compelling and understandable. You were able to figure out what their needs were and how their society was set up and how individuals would make the decisions that they did. It's like the whole society was based off of volcanic vents, because that was the only source of heat. So you had hot water, which would grow the bacterial mats that allowed them to harvest these like little shrimp-like creatures and larger fish and everything. And that was how their whole economy was based. And so if you had a nice hot vent and your house was on a nice hot vent and you had enough of these little things peeling off of it, then you were rich in the blind shadow lobster society. And it was such a well-written book, and it was such a well-written take on a truly, truly alien species, not like a Star Trek different nose of the week alien.
Yeah, I got to read that.
I found it so compelling that I wanted to take a stab someday at doing something like that. It's awesome. A Darkling Sea.
Clarence,
also,
it looked like you were going
In the
to
Black
say
is
something
awesome.
too.
Anyway.
Book or movie?
Nothing comes to my mind in terms of those kinds of impressions. Yeah, my career trajectory is perhaps a culmination of very, very, very small effects. So nothing seems to dramatically change course or make an impression. Rather, it's an aggregation of just a complete integrated history.
Was there an original science question maybe that you were interested in, or something that led you specifically to studying the universe?
Uh, I think it's more human. My father and mother were both scientists, and they both decided to stop doing science actually. So there's this attraction and wondering in some sense what that might be like. So I think that's mostly what set me on the path. And then it's a series of small factors here and there that put me in this bucket in Chicago, going to the South Pole, studying the early universe. But it could have been other things as well. Yeah.
Right. And
But I did have a question for the authors, or actually everyone, which was, so I think that the idea is science fiction and horror, and as you guys have thought about things, researched things, and dreamed about things, something in our current time that I'm reminded of is that the human relationship with science as a whole is not immediately obvious. It is actually really complicated. How we understand science, how we interact with science, how we reject science. How has this been something that you guys have thought about, or and how does it shape how we think and interact? I'm not posing a completely clear question, but that relationship is not something that is assumed.
I feel like I haven't interacted with this idea all that much, but it does make me think of The Shape of Water in a certain respect, where the people who were, at least not necessarily the scientists themselves, but the people who were employing the scientists, like they had their certain uses for science, and they weren't interested in the sort of free development of it. They sometimes literally weaponized it, and sometimes sort of metaphorically. It's just sort of we have a need. Is there a way that science can help us? Like maybe that's the way you can look at a lot of things. Maybe the nuclear bombs, that we dropped. Like maybe you think, you're just looking for a weapon, and now is there a way that science can help us? We weren't so interested in science before, but now that we have a desperate need, let's employ these people. It does seem, and especially right now where there's this puzzling rejection of science that just is so bizarre that you have to, like, where do you draw the line? If you don't believe in science, then I guess you have to stop driving your car, or do you stop using a computer? Do you stop using toothpaste, which was made in a lab? I mean, it's like you either believe in science or you live an Amish lifestyle. Anything in between is confusing to me.
Well, my other gig is I write opinion pieces on politics for places like the New York Times, Hill. It's not confusing to me at all what's happening with science. You have a generation, actually 2 generations of people who want to feel smart without doing any of the work. And so they have decided that they're going to short circuit the whole process and watch QAnon videos. They're going to learn things without actually learn things. They're going to learn things without actually putting in the necessary intellectual effort of rigorously testing them, because they want the veneer of knowledge and science without actually putting in the effort, the research, and the work that goes into that. which, without getting too political, is why they have latched themselves onto a certain golden calf over the last 4 years here, who does exactly the same thing and believes that he knows more than any of the experts. Well, they're all idiots and they get to where he wants. People, it's not so much that we have stopped valuing science, it's that we have stopped valuing the scientific method and want to believe that we are as smart or smarter than the scientists who are actually doing the work, if that makes sense. They want to put on the trappings of it without actually contributing to it. They want to hijack the language of it. They want to steal the legitimacy of it that has been built up over the last over centuries now. Like they want that veneer without having anything behind it. And all of us need to get better at just scratching away that atom-thin gold leaf to get at the rotting wood underneath and showing people that. Because it's not that we don't value science, we do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be pretending.
Yeah, and I think I'll jump in too, as
to value it.
My background
they wouldn't
is
be
in
using the
writing
language
and
of science,
filmmaking, and education. So, this is a question that we ask every day. How can we get people more involved in science? How can we make science cool and fun and interesting? And Paul Castle, the dean of the College of Visual and Performing Arts, has talked about that in previous episodes of Future Telling. But one of the things that he said that struck me is science is losing the battle for hearts and minds. So no matter how great the discoveries are and how amazing life has become because of science, we're not doing a good job of communicating that science and really putting a face on it. And so I think it actually goes back to what we've been talking about all along, is this idea of the fear of the unknown. And because science seems to some people to be unknowable, or because science is some kind of monolith, right? It doesn't have a face, it doesn't have a heart, it doesn't have a voice. It's just, it's just this thing that's pushed out at you as some people perceive it. So really, one of the things that we're trying to do with these talks is get back to that idea of that, science is made out of people. It's for people, and science fiction is exploring those ideas. And in both science and science fiction, we have that ability to really reach people on a different level and start to, turn the tide of this anti-science push that's been happening. That's my goal anyway. So on that note, I think we should open up the Q&A. So I'm going to take us over to the Q&A. And as we start getting questions rolling in, I do want to get back to Daniel's question that he asked the two of you. And I don't think you can get out of a conversation in October without naming a movie or book that has inspired you to do what you do. So as we're starting to take questions from the audience, I would like to hear that.
Well, I certainly have, usually when I get this question, it's in regard to horror stuff that I've done. So I have sort of ready answers for that. For science fiction, I think it might come down to a certain scene in E.T. And I've learned over the years that this is a scene that has traumatized lots of people my age. And it's that scene where E.T. gets sick and he's all like pasty white and he's in a ditch. And it's just like the most horrifying thing when you're a kid. Because you love E.T. and now he's gray and limp in a ditch. I mean, he just looks like a bag of trash thrown out of a car. And I think that sequence, and then the government people sort of rushing in, is a sort of legendarily traumatic sequence for kids my age. People my age who once were kids. And I feel like that that resonates in the impetus or the thing that got me to write Scowler and Bent Heavens, that sort of idea of a hurt alien, you know. That sequence haunts me to this day.
Someone's asking, is it hard to juggle author life with, or science life with home life, or like a work-life balance?
No, I mean, everything's hard. I don't think it's any harder than any other job. I mean, you know, you've got your personal life and your work life. Some jobs have kind of regular hours and some don't. I don't think this is any different. Maybe the only difference is that some jobs you're able to sort of clock out at a certain time, and other jobs you're really kind of always on the job to a certain degree. And I think writing is one of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's interesting. And you in your newsletter, Last Kraus on the Left, you've given updates on all of the things you have in progress. So I don't know how many you have in progress right now, but you've got a chart where you're keeping track of things.
For me, actually having a bunch of projects going on at once actually helps the projects. It doesn't hinder them. I'm able to move between projects, and each project serves as a palate cleanser for the other project. Not every writer is going to be able to work this way. Like, some are going to need to just walk away from the desk totally and sort of recharge. But that's one of the benefits of writing for all different ages and in different formats, is you're able to play them off each other. So they're so different that you're not one isn't poisoning the other. It's only helping in some ways.
And we had another kind of general comment on First Contact. So First Contact isn't something new completely in our society. In the history of humanity, I guess there's been several instances of first contact. Is there something that you've learned from other, real historical ideas of first contact?
I mean, kind of like what I said earlier, that first contact was, for many decades, was seen as meeting the other. Like, coming face to face with your aggressor, coming face to face with your opposite. And my books have tried very hard to shy away from that, because I don't think that's what that's going to look like. I think that if we do run across an alien species at any point, or an alien civilization, that would even want to bother to talk to us, instead of just come in and, fumigate, that they would have a more evolved sense of morality, because otherwise we wouldn't see them coming. So I think that the first contact, if it occurs in a way that we would even come out the other side of it, would be a much more constructive event. Even if it's very standoffish, like you had mentioned Gate Crashers earlier. That book literally has mankind unknowingly held inside of a wildlife preserve, inside of a 30 light year fence around Earth, where the rest of the universe just passes us by until we get our shit together. I think that scenario is probably more likely if there are other intelligent aliens. If there is a first contact where we aren't just immediately annihilated, they're going to want to dialogue with us. That's my sense.
And I don't really have an answer for this one.
Okay, yeah.
So you go right ahead, Gillian. I can't think of a intelligent way to respond to
that. So one of the things that we were thinking about when we were first pushing around topics for this talk was the idea of the dark forest principle. We're sending out messages, right? We're yelling into a dark forest. Sure. And is that really a smart thing to do? Maybe you should be quiet because whatever's in there with you might not be friendly. And so really, instead of scientists reaching out and just kind of shooting out beams of information and different things into space. It should be much more of an idea of listening and waiting and watching. And maybe that's a question for Clarence as well. I know that's not your area per se, but thinking about the role of science in exploration.
I think that listening is a lot more important. From what we know, though, I know everybody likes to talk about having, how honeymooners episodes would be 60 or 70 light years out by now. In reality, it seems like the general background noise of the universe probably starts killing off any of our radio signals 1, 2, maybe 3 light years out. They just get drowned out in the noise. So I don't, and especially now, because we aren't just like we're still like doing radio broadcasts, and we're still doing some terrestrial broadcasts, but so much more of what we're doing is cable satellites that are pointed back down at the Earth. They're not just they're high gain antennas that are pointed back at the Earth. They're not pointed out, or they're not omnidirectional. So I think that our imprint on the rest of the galaxy is probably smaller than we think it is. And so I think we're probably a little safer than some of the doomsayers think we are. But caution is probably still warranted, because if they can get here, we don't stand a chance. No chance at all. Absolutely no chance. It wouldn't even be a fight.
What would you like to see happen, both in the idea of, coming into contact with aliens or space travel or different things that we discover in space in maybe the next 50 to 100 years? What's something that you think would be a great step forward, or a very hopeful thing that we could accomplish in this area?
I'm hoping somebody else steps in. Man, I don't know. Clarence, save us.
I mean, for me, I think it would be great if we could recognize our common humanity, that incidents like that, and our family, like as we're looking into our homes, that is a real dimension of who we are, and that could be turned into something that is positive. I think you were also asking about something like with technology, and to be completely self-serving, that you guys would fund my projects.
All right. And so to spin it a little bit differently for Daniel and maybe Patrick, one way or the other. So what kind of books have not been written about this topic that either you think might be a good book, or you'd like to see somebody else write? I know this isn't, maybe, we don't have to go straight sci-fi. You could go cosmic horror, aside from those space tombs.
These are tougher questions than they sound like, because if I knew that, I would write it, and I wouldn't say it. I would just keep it and take advantage of that idea. I don't know. It's very difficult. I mean, even if you had asked the questions about sort of what do I want to see in horror, it's hard. I think in sci-fi, it's not so much the topics that I would think about. It's more sort of who's writing the books. I would like to just see more people coming at it from different perspectives, and that's sort of my hope for any sort of genre or any medium, really. If for no other reason than who wants to hear the same old things over and over, just for like a pure enjoyment reason. Let's hear different kinds of people in all sorts of different kind of situations in their life telling these stories, and that's naturally going to give them new angles that we haven't considered. So I'm looking forward to that. I hope that continues to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think I've grilled everybody enough. So I'd like to thank all of our guests, Clarence Chang, Daniel Kraus and Patrick S. Tomlinson. You can find more information about all of the speakers at go.niu.edu/futuretelling, as well as some of our upcoming events. And I do also want to mention that this event was part of our month-long celebration of all things STEM in STEMfest, and you can check out more about STEMfest, so you can get links to that, but there are more conversations happening, including next week. There is a presentation about the science and technology of haunted houses. So lots of good things still to come. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your time and your expertise for tonight. And thank you to, oh, there he is. Thank you for all of the interesting conversation tonight. And you will be able to watch this on our YouTube channel for NIU STEAM, and also on the Future Telling website. So thanks to all of our speakers tonight.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.